Hey, good afternoon to you. It is now 4:06, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, Marc Morano joins us from Climate Depot. We'll chat with him about some of these big confirmation hearings going on today, including for Lee Zeldin and Doug Burgum, as the left tries to get in the way of abundant, cheap American energy. Steve Moore is here at 5:30 from the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. He'll weigh in on Scott Bessent's confirmation hearing for Treasury Secretary today. The left does not know what to do with Scott Bessent. It's hilarious. And you can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. What can we expect on Inauguration Day? And I don't just mean, of course, out of President Trump and his incoming administration, but also out of the left. What is the left going to do? According to police who gave a briefing earlier this week, they indicated that at least one permit has been pulled for a lefty group called We Fight Back, which is expected to take to the streets on Monday. And this is what it sounded like when the cops were explaining it.
On the day of the inauguration, there will also be demonstrations going on. A group called We Fight Back expects they on their permit said they expect about 10,000 people, and that will be in a couple of locations in the downtown area.
All right, so a couple of locations, 10 to 15,000 people running around D.C. called We Fight Back. Whatever happened to the left criticizing the word fight in politics, by the way? You're not allowed to say fight. That's violence. Joining us now to discuss what's happening here, Ryan Mauro joins us. He's an investigative researcher in counter-extremism and international security at the Capitol Research Center. Ryan, good to have you with us, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so, the left has routinely rioted, unfortunately, when Republican presidents are sworn in, famously in 2017, causing a lot of damage in D.C. What do we know right now about what to expect Monday?
I would say you're going to see a repeat of the attempted property damage and fighting with police that you saw when Bibi Netanyahu came to the United States to address Congress. It's the same groups that are involved. It's the same city. And we know from their recent patterns of behavior that that's kind of what they do. Now, the bigger story here, though, is not just that these are crazy people. It's that this really is a network of a bunch of different organizations. There's two coalitions that overlap that are involved in this, so it's not just We Fight Back. But We Fight Back, at the core of it, is very closely linked, you can say almost operates on behalf of, the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party. They get their funding through a person in China, and the Singham Network, Singham is his name, and the Singham Network is like what he funds. And he funds all of these nonprofits that engage in this type of activity. And so there's a common thread between the members of We Fight Back and the Chinese Communist Party, and they're all interlinked, and they're pro-Iran, pro-Hamas, pro-everything bad.
But, okay, so insofar as there's any coherent ideology that animates these groups, as I understand it, one of them is, the Answer Coalition, the Act Now to Stop War and End Racism. These types of people, aren't they arguing that they want peace in the Middle East? Isn't that one of their arguments? And so why would they be protesting President Trump, who's already producing results on that front without even being president?
Oh, they love words like peace and anti-war. They just don't like actually pursuing it.
Yeah.
So if you look at their statements, like the Answer Coalition, they signed an endorsement of Iran and Hamas and all the terrorists that they support and sided with Russia over Ukraine. And the Answer Coalition, again, that's at the center of the We Fight Back coalition. They operate essentially as part of another organization called Progress Unity Fund, and that's funded by the guy in China, the billionaire over there. So that's at the center of the We Fight Back coalition. And then the other coalition, the January 20th coalition, is just a rebranding of another network that I investigated for Capitol Research Center last year.
Yes.
Where I found about 162 groups involved that support terrorism or openly call themselves Marxist, communist, or anarchist.
So in other words, these groups don't actually have any sort of like unified ideology that makes sense, except for they're agents of chaos designed to cause trouble in the United States.
To them, that is the ideology, though. So it's like different brands of sedition, and sedition is sort of the ideology. The idea is that through chaos and overthrowing the U.S. government, beauty emerges, and whether that's communism, Marxism, anarchism, that can all be discussed later. It's this general idea that you accelerate. That's like accelerationism is a term for this.
Yes.
That you actually accelerate tensions internally so that you paralyze the government and it starts falling apart. And then the true forces that represent the people truly will then come to power, and then you'll have paradise and all that. And they believe the U.S. is an illegitimate country because we occupy Native American land. So it's a combination of these communist, Marxist, anarchist narratives. And then there's overlaps even with white nationalist narratives, even though they claim to hate them. But when you look at how they operate and things that they say, they're really quite similar.
Yeah, it's senseless and destructive. That's the commonality there. All right, so what do you expect to see on Monday then? Do you expect kind of the routine rioting / property damage, hectoring people who are trying to peacefully attend the inauguration? We're looking at 250,000 ticketed guests to attend the inauguration on Monday. What are they going to encounter as they're going through the city?
There's certainly going to be a lot of security, but I mean, if we've learned anything in the past few days, is that sometimes not the brightest minds are making the decisions involving security. I mean, when you have a radical imam who is loyal to the Iranian regime that is trying to assassinate Trump, getting in the perimeter of Trump to speak at his inauguration, like, you can't rule out anything happening. Like, that's the most boneheaded thing I've ever heard of in terms of preparing security. So, yeah, there'll be lots of police and every conceivable preparation and investment in resources will be there. But if essentially an agent of assassins, aspiring assassins of Trump get invited to come near him at the inauguration, then I don't have much faith that this is going to be a flawless security process.
You're concerned about it. I'm worried about it too. I want to make sure everything goes off without a hitch. But of course, the left, especially, is always looking to introduce these hitches. You talk about your research into China. How much more meddlesome do you anticipate the Chinese Communist Party becoming as President Trump arrives?
It'll be more and more because it works, and they're learning more and more from the technology as AI advances. Then they'll be able to engage in 5G warfare, this asymmetric warfare that, again, it's not just a method, but it's like part of their ideology. They believe that this is not just how they win as a strategy, but as communists, they have to engage in this type of stuff. Now they're coming up against Trump, who is a real threat. So I would say they're going to double down on it because it's really the only conceivable strategy that they can muster is to cause internal chaos in the U.S. and do things like one of the strategies them and the Russians and the Iranians do is they flood social media with so much misinformation of varying severity so that people just reflexively believe what they want to believe and just like they don't bother thinking anymore. And I saw that article and I was like, man, that is a smart strategy. So it's not just trying to convince people of your position. It's just to overwhelm them so they don't think. Yeah.
It's wild. All right, well, we'll keep our eyes open, head on a swivel, going into Inauguration Day. Ryan Mauro with the Capitol Research Center. Sir, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
There he is. All right, Ryan Mauro, as these lefty groups, they've been responsible for a lot of chaos. And Ryan pointing to the China connection, too, with all of this. And China, I mean, remember back to the very first days of the Biden administration, China was trying to basically reject any effort by the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, to say, hey, you got to get control of all of your human rights violations. Tony Blinken was trying to lecture the Chinese. They turned around and they go, hey, what about Black Lives Matter? What about Black Lives Matter? You treat black people awful. That was their retort. And so, in other words, they kind of have the left's number, especially in the United States, and they take advantage of that, and they cause a lot of chaos. So we got to keep our eyes open for that. But I am praying for a good security situation on Monday for the inauguration. I know so many are. And we've got the numbers that they're telling us right now in terms of the law enforcement presence. It looks like it's going to be about 1 out of every 10 attendees to the inauguration. 25,000 law enforcement across all of the agencies, and we've got volunteer law enforcement being deputized from across the country. We'll have just great local cops from all over our country arriving by the thousands to help with all of the efforts necessary to help navigate the crowd into the space and also to secure the area. So I'm hoping for a very, very secure event. But I'm worried, you just get nervous. You get nervous in the wake of the campaign where President Trump had two near misses. One wasn't even a miss. It was a hit. He got hit on July 13th as a man tried to kill him. And we just can't let that happen anymore. You can't have that happen. I'm also concerned about these reporting the DJI drones, which, I don't know if you're following this story or not, but DJI is the largest manufacturer of consumer drones on the planet. So if you've ever tried to buy a drone just to have for fun, to fly a drone with a camera on it and that kind of thing, they're primarily sold, or at least the biggest company that sells them, DJI. And traditionally, the way it's worked in years past is when you try and fly your drone, if you're in the area of a no-fly zone, in other words, Washington, D.C., the software prevents you from flying the drone. The software actually prevents you from flying in the no-fly areas. That technology has just been turned off. The Verge, one of the tech publications in that space, reporting today, or this past week, DJI will no longer stop drones from flying over airports, wildfires, and the White House. And they say what I just said. For over a decade, you couldn't easily fly a DJI drone. These are made in China. Over restricted areas in the United States. DJI's software would automatically stop you from flying over runways, power plants, public emergencies like wildfires, and the White House. But confusingly, amidst the greatest U.S. outpouring of drone distrust in years, says The Verge, and an incident of a DJI drone operator hindering L.A. wildfire fighting efforts, DJI is getting rid of its geofence. DJI will no longer enforce no-fly zones, instead only offering a dismissible warning, meaning only common sense, empathy, and the fear of getting caught by authorities will prevent people from flying where they shouldn't. In a blog post on this subject, DJI characterized all of this as, quote, placing control back in the hands of drone operators. They also suggested that technology is like something called remote ID, which publicly broadcasts the location of a drone and their operator during the flight, are, quote, providing authorities with the tools they need to enforce existing rules, according to DJI Global Policy Head Adam Welsh, who spoke to The Verge. That's insane. That's insane. And of course, this idea that it's going to give you a warning, well, that's fine if you're a law-abiding citizen who will be warned off of flying your drone inappropriately in a no-fly zone. What if you're a terrorist? Oh, a warning popped up. Well, shoot, we're going to have to stop now. No, not at all. So yes, is there cause for concern? Definitely. Now, one would also have to hope and pray and assume that anti-drone technology is very much available to the United States federal government and could be used. But I'm telling you, that July 13th event in Butler, Pennsylvania, where the assassin flew a drone ahead of the rally and went undetected, is not encouraging on that front. So this is a big deal. I think this is a big deal story, that as the leading consumer drone manufacturer out of China has deactivated a system that prevented these drones from flying in no-fly zones. The timing cannot be missed. Just ahead of the inauguration, at the very least, it's designed to, rattle people. At the very, very least. It's 421 now. Speaking of security for the president and everyone around him, we have breaking news now. Susan Crabtree over at Real Clear Politics reporting that President Trump is now set to announce Sean Curran, the head of his Secret Service campaign detail, as the new Secret Service director. President Trump expected to make the head of his Secret Service detail the new Secret Service director. You'll remember the image of Sean from the famous fight, fight, fight photo. President Trump raising his arm in the air, blood on his face after being shot at that rally on July 13th in Butler, Pennsylvania. Curran was on the right side of that photo wearing the sunglasses and staring straight ahead at kind of in the direction of the cameras. He's the guy, apparently. Susan Crabtree now reporting that he will become the next Secret Service director. That's according to 3 sources who she has spoken to over several days this week. One source, she reports, specifically told her that President Trump plans to name Sean Curran as Secret Service director tonight or tomorrow, and that Curran plans to bring in a retired agent as a deputy. Somebody from his ties to the Newark Secret Service field office. That's where Curran first started as an agent. It looks like Curran, I've seen a bunch of images here. He's been with President Trump through the years, including in his first term, protecting him all along. President Trump has a lot of trust in this guy, and now he's trusting him to run the entire Secret Service. That's the report at this hour. More as it comes. Marc Morano will be with us in just a moment. He's from Climate Depot. We've got a lot to talk to him about as a couple of Trump nominees face Senate Democrats who want to talk about the flying spaghetti monster in the sky, climate change. Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 4:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up at 5:30, Steve Moore joins us. We talk in particular about the testimony of the Treasury Secretary nominee today, Scott Bessent. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. A couple of confirmation hearings all happening simultaneously today for very important positions, among them for the EPA, Lee Zeldin testifying today. Also, we had Doug Burgum facing questions about his quest to become the Secretary of the Interior. And I mentioned Scott Bessent at Treasury. I want to play some audio for you. This is just a couple different pieces related to the left's obsession with climate change. Here, again, EPA nominee Lee Zeldin today and this exchange with Bernie Sanders.
Would you describe climate change as an existential threat, meaning that there must be an urgency to get our act together, to address it?
Senator, we must, with urgency, be addressing these issues. And today, as we talk about any way at all that the EPA can do its part to make sure that our air and water are cleaner.
Okay, that's Lee Zeldin's exchange. Doug Burgum, meanwhile, for Interior Secretary, talking about China and energy.
China they permitted more than 2 coal plants a week in the first half of 2023. And they're already the world's largest emitter. So we're competing against someone who's going to create more electricity, produce more AI, and this could be how we lose the Cold War with them if we don't get it done. We have to do it here.
Yeah, big deal. And then Ron Wyden finally talking to Scott Bessent today, the Democrat senator, saying, hey, we're in a clean energy race with China, he said ludicrously.
Now there is a big effort in the Trump administration to reverse it. I think that's going to be bad for the economy, but it is going to be damn good for China because we are in an arms race on clean energy with them. Are you going to be on the side of people who want to unravel this?
Senator Wyden, just so we can frame this for everyone in the room, China will build 100 new coal plants this year. There is not a clean energy race. There is an energy race. China will build 10 nuclear plants this year. That is not solar. I am in favor of more nuclear plants.
I got to say, of the three, I like Scott Bessent's the answers the most so far. Here to tell us what he thinks of all of it, Marc Morano, Executive Editor and Chief Correspondent for CFACT, ClimateDepot.com. Marc, good to have you back with us.
Hey, thank you, Vince. Happy to be here.
Okay, all right. So, you've got the field. What do you think of these guys as they were testifying today on this issue?
Well, do you want what I'm supposed to say, or do you want what I really think? That's
always what you really think. I genuinely do.
Well, this may surprise people because, they're great picks over who we have now. I mean, we're talking about Lee Zeldin to replace the current EPA Administrator Johnson. You have the Interior Secretary, Burgum, light years better. The Energy Secretary is better as well. The key here, though, is that they capitulated. All three. This is right yesterday for energy, and Zeldin today and Burgum today. They capitulated to that narrative on climate change. None of the three would stand up to it. And to me, that's what stood out. Now, just before I go any further down that dark path, let me just say that we have an energy secretary now, Jennifer Granholm, who did a video in 2018 calling for the end of oil, keep it in the ground. So we're going to be light years ahead of where we are. But here's why this is important. If you go, and I absolutely love Chris Wright for Energy Secretary. He's fantastic. But I'm a media guy. I was at the committee, the Senate Environment Public Works Committee, the communication director. I was the researcher, the speechwriter, and the entire communications. And to hear the narrative of all these Republican nominees, all three, give in on climate change in the year 2025, when you have Donald Trump, who just literally reset not just the climate change narrative and debate, but he reset the debate on DEI, the debate on transgender, the debate on critical race theory, the debate on Black lives. I mean, you can go through the list on ESG, and to have them just basically act like George W. Bush is president, very disappointing. In fact, just to go through it real quick, Chris Wright said climate change is a global challenge that we need to solve. Burgum today just did not push back on anything, was very amiable. And when it comes to Lee Zeldin, the thing about Lee Zeldin is he's a New York Republican. He was featured on Years of Living Dangerously, 2017, I believe, and he joined the Republican Climate Solutions Caucus under pressure from Hollywood interviews on camera, and the media and liberals love this. So I'm not saying they're going to be bad picks in the overall. I'm saying that they are not naturally ready to take on the Washington establishment. And that's what upset me most about it today. But it also exposed the absurdity of the Democrats. But again, you want to see them push back, and they weren't by any of these three nominees.
You do. Narrative. Well, I will say, I agree with you. You do want to see them push back. But, like, for instance, Pete Hegseth had his hearing earlier this week. I wanted to see him fight back even more against the unfair attacks the Democrats were lobbing against him. But he maintained, he was very poised and very disciplined, and he had a good hearing, because the end goal of these hearings is for these guys to make it through and get confirmed. So do you think that maybe they leaned a little bit too much into that goal at the expense of arguing the greater principle?
Yes, I mean, they could have given advice to Supreme Court nominees. This is what of course, Supreme Court nominees famously do. I'm not saying that they should have argued with Bernie Sanders or Senator Whitehouse or Adam Schiff. I'm saying they could have gently pushed back with facts, figures. When it was the absurd scenario with Senator Markey in Massachusetts, one of the co-sponsors of the Green New Deal, pushing Zeldin about basically, look at L.A., that's what caused climate change. You don't think that's a problem? You don't think that's existential? The senators were asking him. And he just deferred, wouldn't comment.
Yeah.
There's little things you can say, kind of like wildfires used to be worse 100 years ago, Senator. To actually say, are you implying that somehow the Green New Deal would have avoided the California fires? Wildfires are typically land use, development, water usage. Forestry practices have nothing to do with the climate. In fact, peer-reviewed studies have shown just recently that precipitation and temperature have very little impact on these wildfires. And a U.S. Geological Survey just announced the LA wildfires are not climate change. Who am I to disagree with the top scientists at the United States Geological? That's the kind of thing I would have liked to have seen.
Yes.
Gentle reframing and pushback. Instead, and here's the problem with this. If you go back all these decades, when you have someone like Donald Trump, who is a narrative changer, it's almost like Ronald Reagan, it just worries you, because if he doesn't have the team willing to fight back on this, what does it mean? It means they're not going to be as expansive in terms of reversing policies. They're not going to be revolutionary. They're going to sort of do what Trump wants and keep it safe. And we saw this with Trump's first term, and I hope this will be different. I mean, Trump's first term, every cabinet member, including Rick Perry, governor of Texas, including his Secretary of State, former Exxon CEO Rex Tillerson.
Yeah.
everyone except the EPA director told him to get out, to stay in the UN Paris Agreement. Only his EPA director told him to get out. And by the way, that was Scott Pruitt, his first term. He was the only cabinet member of Trump who was willing to challenge the narrative. What happened to Scott Pruitt in the first term? He challenged the climate narrative. He was harassed at restaurants. They went after him because apparently he got an Airbnb at somehow below market rates on some weekend rental or something. I mean, some rental he had. It was the most absurd standard, but it tells you this is what the establishment and the Uniparty cares about most. You must bend the knee at the narrative. And to me, that was a major failure of all three nominees. Having said that, I think they're going to do great policy. It's very disappointing.
I know exactly what you're saying. What you're talking about is sort of the outer perimeter of the debate. Like, what is the acceptable turf on which the rest of us all battle? Because these leaders really do set that. And in political science, we refer to that as the Overton window. Like, kind of, what are the bounds of the debate? And I'll give you an example of where we've seen a lot of progress in the last few years. And that's on this transgender nonsense. People stopped saying, oh, it's a transgender man or a transgender woman. No, it's a dude playing women's sports. And once enough people keep repeating the truth out loud at volume, then it really sets the terms of the debate right there, squarely on, in that case, reality. This is the same thing you're talking about, which is like, don't play footsie with the climate change stuff and point out that the left doesn't even believe it. And when you hear Ron Wyden say today to Scott Besson that China is somehow in a clean energy race with the United States, that's on its face absurd. And Scott Besson, that's not somebody you're criticizing right now, I noticed. He was right to call that out. We're not in a clean energy race with them. We are in an energy race with them, he said.
Yeah, and in fact, I've heard that for years, always about, we got to win this race for China. And my answer was always, if China went to virtue signal the world and built, they have whole cities of old rusted windmills and solar they don't even use.
Yes.
They make a fortune of this revolution because they sell it to the West. It takes 500,000 pounds of material dug up from the earth to make one Tesla-sized battery. Guess who has the monopoly on all that mining and all that? China. It takes all the concrete, non-renewable plastic, steel to make these windmills. All of this so-called green energy is not green. It's arguable whether at the end, whether it's even a break-even proposition. It's not a break-even proposition. And this is what they fail. Now, in the case of someone like Doug Burgum, I'm going to go I'll go darker one last time. He's a former Microsoft executive, friend of Bill Gates. He has praised Bill Gates as essentially a visionary. He's all in on ESG, was all in on ESG. He's all in on carbon capture, which is the Republican version of solar wind mandates because they can hand it out to their campaign donors. And it's the idea of the most useless thing you can imagine, getting carbon dioxide, pumping up. This is, by the way, Vince, this is important too. People don't understand. I went to the American Petroleum Institute event this week. You'd think, oh, big oil, they're against all this green energy subsidy. They went only a surgical removal of the Inflation Reduction Act. The farmers' lobby, which for decades has been skeptical of man-made global warming, guess what? They changed their position in 2024. Did they do that, Vince? Because they don't want to lose the subsidies now going to farms to capture carbon. It's another grip. They got farmers involved, and you have Republican congressmen. So this is what the nominees are up against, and they're playing the game. That's what was so disappointing. I don't want this to be, again, I'm going to go back to 1980s. I was a volunteer, Ronald Reagan, 1980. Ronald Reagan, the first 2 years were phenomenal, and then the Democrats took over, I believe, big election in the midterms. His tax cuts were done. The budget cuts were done. And talking about domestic policy, he went on to do great foreign policy, but he was basically done after the first 2 years. For Donald Trump, he had probably 2 years or less to actually try to do all this. He needs aggressive people. He needs to control the narrative, and he needs to make it permanent. One of the ways you make something permanent is not capitulating to the establishment and the uniparty and all the talking points. And again, that's what was frustrating. We were screaming today at these hearings.
Oh, I love it. I love your take on all of this. And the good thing is, what you should do is browbeat these guys into submission, make them better. And like you said, these guys are going to be vast improvements over the current awful regime that's selling us out. I really do. I like this tact, and I'm always for it, which is like, hey, just get better. And when you're weak, we'll let you know. I want to play one piece of audio for you from Joe Biden's feeble exit address last night. He talked about the existential threat of climate change. Here's what that sounded like. Marc Morano, take a listen.
So much is at stake right now the existential threat of climate change has never been clearer. Just look across the country, from California to North Carolina. That's why I signed the most significant climate and clean energy law ever in the history of the world.
So wildfires that were exacerbated by the left's mismanagement of the land in California and the available resources to extinguish them, and the hurricanes, which, by the way, have become less frequent in the United States, are the result of climate change? Am I following that right?
You know, it's just complete bonkers. Even the United Nations, even our National Climate Assessment, which, by the way, was written by Greenpeace activist scientists, acknowledge that hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, wildfires, droughts are either no trend or declining trend on climate timescales of 30, 50, 100 years. There is no there when they talk about the existential threat. This is the equivalent of a boardwalk palm reader or, soothsayer saying, many bad things will happen due to climate change. And guess what? Whenever anything bad happens, oh my gosh, that's due to climate change. I also liken this whole nonsense of every bad weather event. It's like a lottery. Your chance of winning the lottery, very low. The chance of someone somewhere winning the lottery, very high. So what they do is they find every lottery winner / every extreme weather event, and they make it look like it's a trend, And then what do you think? They want everyone to play the lottery. They want everyone to believe that. By the way, not true. CNN, shocking segment earlier this week. It's up at Climate Depot, my website. Their analyst went through and said in 35 years, there's been no change in people's fear or concern over global warming, and they don't blame the LA wildfires. So even despite all that propaganda, the President of the United States throwing out words like existential, the public isn't buying it according to CNN's data.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Boardwalk palm readers. That's funny. Yeah, Miss Cleo has been in charge of our climate policy. It's time for that to end. Hey, Marc Morano, thank you. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, I was going to say, Hegseth handled everything I thought fantastic. He said anyone who promotes the sustainable Navy and the solar panels and the Army and all that, I mean, it's bonkers. Our defense secretary came out a couple years ago, Lloyd Austin, and said climate is an existential threat, making it more difficult, and we need to act as a military. We need a sustainable military. It's insane. I love Pete Hegseth there, as I love Treasury nominee, and I love the Department of Transportation, Sean Duffy. I love Chris Wright at Energy, but don't take me wrong. I'm just saying this is important. They're worried about their careers down the road. They don't want to be seen as a climate denier, but they could have handled it in a way much defter and much more creative, where they didn't give in to the narrative.
Yeah, anyway, you're like a football coach. You're like a football coach smacking them on the helmet and saying, get out there, play better next time. Hey, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it, Marc Morano. Good to talk to you.
All right, thank you.
Your calls coming in. Always appreciate those. Ann is in Alexandria on line 4. Ann, you're on the Vince Colonnese Show.
Vince, I took issue with your last guest and the way he characterized the way our nominees addressed. They did not endorse it as an existential threat. They were very careful in their language. They said they support clean air and clean water. Gee, that's radical. I would have liked for them to have said, yeah, Republicans do support clean air and clean water. That's why we set up the EPA under Nixon. That's why Ruckelshaus is the one that got the only good things that EPA has done in terms of getting water and air cleaned up. And we're going to address, the real problem with real solutions. But they never used the word existential. They were very careful in the way they did it. So I wouldn't beat up on them yet. Let's wait for them to do something wrong.
Yeah, I think Mark is holding them to a very high standard and doesn't want them playing footsie with all this climate garbage, which they did to an extent.
Right, but we want them confirmed.
We do want them confirmed. Which, by the way, I did bring up that point earlier in our conversation. That seems to be the strategy they're taking. But hey, we do what we got to do. Keep them honest.
And Vince, while we're at it, let's get them to get rid of catalytic converters, which create more CO2.
The catalytic converter, which is, by the way,
catalytic converter creates CO2 out of CO.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, well, if you're concerned about carbon dioxide. Meanwhile, like you said, I think the real concern is clean air, clean water, like a normal person would think. Coming up, Steve Moore will be with us. More of your phone calls, more audio from these hearings. We've got a lot to get to ahead on the Vince Colonnese Show.